Ukrainian drone strike on the Russian ship. Ukrainian naval drones target and hit a Russian military vessel. Footage shows precision, coordination, and vulnerability of Russian naval assets. Emphasize how asymmetric drone warfare is reshaping the Black Sea conflict. Immediate aftermath and strategic shock. Russian response, confusion, and damage control following the strike. Broader implications, escalation risks, loss of deterrence, and propaganda impact. Signals a shift where Russian naval power is challenged without direct naval battles. A Russian military ship thought it was safe, heavily armed, deep behind enemy lines. Then Ukrainian drone struck with terrifying precision. But what happened after the explosion shocked even military analysts and changed the balance in the Black Sea. This wasn't just another battlefield incident, it was a clear warning. Ukraine's drone forces executed a bold strike against a Russian naval asset, exposing critical weaknesses in Russia's military dominance. And the aftermath revealed something far more alarming for Moscow than the damage itself. Today, we break down how this attack unfolded, why Russia was caught off guard, and what this means for the future of modern warfare. Stay with us, because the consequences are bigger than you think. The strike began long before the first explosion, rooted in weeks of quiet preparation, surveillance, and strategic patience. Ukrainian forces had been steadily refining their use of naval drones, learning from earlier missions and adapting to Russian defenses that were once considered formidable. The Russian ship in question was operating under the assumption of relative safety, relying on layered air defenses, electronic warfare systems, and the sheer belief that Ukraine lacked the capability to reach it effectively. That assumption would prove costly. Ukrainian intelligence assets tracked the vessel's movements, routines, and defensive posture, identifying windows of vulnerability where complacency outweighed caution. What followed was not a reckless gamble but a calculated operation designed to test, penetrate, and ultimately shatter the illusion of Russian naval invulnerability. As the drones were launched, they moved low and fast across the water, exploiting the natural clutter of the sea surface to avoid early detection. These were not crude, improvised devices, but purpose-built platforms equipped with guidance systems, sensors, and explosive payloads optimized for maritime targets. Each drone played a role, whether as a decoy to draw fire, a scout to relay real-time data, or a strike unit intended to deliver the final blow. Russian radar and lookout systems, already strained by the constant threat environment, struggled to differentiate between harmless noise and an incoming attack. By the time the threat was fully recognized, the drones were already too close for comfort. On board the Russian ship, alarms sounded as crew members scrambled to respond. Defensive weapons were brought online, and attempts were made to jam or disable the incoming drones electronically. However, the speed and coordination of the attack left little room for error. Ukrainian operators, watching the engagement unfold through live feeds, adjusted trajectories and teaming to counter Russian countermeasures. This dynamic, real-time control highlighted a critical shift in modern warfare, where decisions once made by commanders on the bridge were now being contested by operators hundreds of kilometers away, armed with data, precision, and resolve. The moment of impact was sudden and devastating. One or more drones struck the hull near critical systems, triggering explosions that sent shockwaves through the vessel. Fire erupted almost instantly, fed by fuel, ammunition, or damaged machinery. Thick smoke rose into the air, visible from miles away, marking the ship's position like a flare. For the crew, the reality of the situation set in rapidly. This was no minor incident or near miss. The ship had taken a direct hit, and its ability to fight, maneuver, or even remain afloat was now in question. Damage control teams rushed to contain flooding and flames, but the effectiveness of their efforts was limited by the scale and location of the damage. From a broader perspective, the strike demonstrated how Ukraine had turned a disadvantage into a strength. Lacking a traditional blue water navy capable of challenging Russia ship for ship, Ukraine invested in unmanned systems that were cheaper, harder to detect, and easier to deploy in numbers. Each successful strike reinforced the idea that dominance at sea no longer depended solely on large, expensive vessels bristling with weapons. Instead, it could be contested by small, agile platforms guided by intelligence, creativity, and a willingness to take risks. The Russian ship, once a symbol of power and control, suddenly became evidence of a shifting balance. The psychological impact of the strike was just as significant as the physical damage. For Russian sailors, the knowledge that threats could emerge seemingly out of nowhere undermined confidence and morale. Every radar blip, every wave crest, became a potential danger. The sea, once viewed as a buffer and a domain of relative safety, turned into a contested and unpredictable battlespace. For Ukrainian forces and the broader public, the strike served as proof that innovation and determination could offset material disadvantages. It reinforced the narrative that Russia's military, despite its size and resources, was vulnerable to smart, adaptive tactics. International observers took note as well. Analysts dissected the footage and reports, pointing out how the attack fit into a larger pattern of Ukraine using drones to target high-value assets. The strike was not an isolated event but part of an evolving campaign aimed at restricting Russian freedom of movement in the Black Sea. By forcing Russian ships to operate further from the coast, invest more heavily in defenses, or avoid certain areas altogether, Ukraine could achieve strategic effects far beyond the immediate damage inflicted. Each drone attack imposed costs, not just in repairs and lost capability, but in time, attention, and resources diverted from other missions. The technological implications were impossible to ignore. The operation showcased the maturation of drone warfare, where coordination, resilience, and adaptability mattered as much as raw firepower. It also raised questions about the future of naval design and doctrine. If relatively inexpensive drones could threaten large warships, navies around the world would need to rethink how they protect their assets and project power. The Russian ship strike became a case study in how quickly the rules of engagement were changing, driven by rapid innovation and the pressures of an ongoing conflict. At its core, the drone strike represented a clash between old assumptions and new realities. Russia's reliance on traditional naval strength met Ukraine's embrace of unconventional methods, and the outcome spoke volumes. The attack was not just about damaging a ship but about sending a message that no platform was beyond reach, no defense entirely foolproof. It highlighted how modern conflicts reward those who learn, adapt, and exploit emerging technologies faster than their adversaries. As the smoke cleared and the full extent of the damage became known, one thing was clear: the strike had redefined what was possible in the maritime domain, and the ripple effects would be felt far beyond the immediate scene of the attack. In the moments after the strike, confusion dominated the scene as the Russian ship struggled to comprehend the scale of what had just occurred. Communications became fragmented, with overlapping reports from crew members attempting to assess damage, locate fears, and determine whether additional drones were still inbound. The immediate concern was survival rather than combat effectiveness. Power fluctuations, damaged sensors, and impaired propulsion systems limited the ship's ability to maneuver, leaving it vulnerable in waters that were no longer predictable or secure. What was once a controlled military environment rapidly turned into a crisis scenario, forcing the crew into reactive decision-making under extreme pressure. As smoke continued to rise from the vessel, Russian command structures were compelled to respond quickly, not only to assist the damaged ship but to contain the broader implications of the attack. Nearby units were alerted, air patrols intensified, and defensive postures across the region were adjusted almost immediately. This sudden shift revealed a deeper issue: the attack had disrupted established operational rhythms. Ships that were previously tasked with patrols, missile launches, or logistical support now had to prioritize self-defense and caution. The sense of initiative, so critical in military operations, appeared to slip as Russian forces recalibrated in real time. The damage itself extended beyond what was visible from the outside. Even if the ship remained afloat, the impact on its combat readiness was significant. Systems critical to navigation, targeting, and communication may have been degraded or rendered unreliable. Repairs at sea are limited, and returning to port would expose the vessel to further risks, including additional drone or missile strikes. Each option carried consequences, forcing Russian commanders into difficult choices that highlighted the cost of vulnerability in modern naval warfare. The ship's temporary or permanent removal from active duty represented a tangible loss, but the intangible effects were arguably more severe. News of the strike spread quickly, amplified by imagery, commentary, and competing narratives. For Russia, managing the information space became nearly as important as managing the battlefield. Official statements sought to minimize damage or frame the incident as contained, while independent analysts and foreign observers examined evidence suggesting a more serious outcome. This tension between narrative control and observable reality placed additional strain on credibility. In an era where conflicts are fought as much through perception as through force, the inability to convincingly project strength can erode deterrence and invite further challenges. Within Russian military circles, the strike prompted urgent reviews of defensive measures and operational doctrine. Questions emerged about the effectiveness of existing counter-drone systems, the adequacy of crew training, and the assumptions underlying naval deployments. The idea that layered defenses alone could guarantee safety was increasingly difficult to defend. Instead, the attack suggested that adaptability and constant innovation were necessary just to maintain parity, let alone superiority. This internal reckoning, while largely unseen by the public, represented a significant disruption to long-held beliefs about naval power and control. For Ukraine, the aftermath reinforced the strategic value of persistence and innovation. The successful strike validated investments in unmanned systems and highlighted the importance of intelligence integration, teaming, and psychological impact. The attack did not need to sink the ship outright to achieve its objectives. By forcing Russia to divert resources, alter behavior, and question assumptions, Ukraine gained leverage disproportionate to the cost of the operation. Each such incident accumulated pressure, gradually reshaping the strategic environment in ways that favored a more agile and adaptive force. The broader strategic shock extended beyond the immediate participants. Other nations watched closely, recognizing that the lessons of this incident applied far beyond the Black Sea. Navies accustomed to operating large, expensive platforms began to reconsider their exposure to asymmetric threats. Defense planners debated how future fleets should be structured, protected, and employed in contested environments where even non-state or smaller state actors could wield disruptive capabilities. The strike underscored a reality that many had anticipated but few had fully confronted. Technological diffusion was leveling aspects of the battlefield. Economically and logistically, the consequences also began to accumulate. Repairing damaged ships is costly and time-consuming, requiring specialized facilities, skilled labor, and secure supply chains. Even rumors of vulnerability can affect insurance rates, shipping routes, and commercial confidence in nearby waters. While the strike targeted a military asset, the ripple effects touched civilian considerations as well, further complicating the strategic picture. The line between military and economic security grew thinner, emphasizing how modern conflicts blur traditional boundaries. The psychological dimension of the aftermath continued to evolve in the days that followed. For Russian personnel, heightened alertness became the norm, increasing fatigue and stress. Constant vigilance against small, fast-moving threats imposed a mental toll that was difficult to quantify but impossible to ignore. Over time, such strain can degrade performance and increase the likelihood of errors, compounding existing challenges. For Ukrainian forces, each successful operation boosted confidence and reinforced a sense of momentum, which can be a powerful force multiplier in prolonged conflicts. Diplomatically, the incident added another layer of complexity to an already tense international environment. Allies and adversaries alike interpreted the strike through their own strategic lenses. Some viewed it as evidence of Ukraine's growing competence and resilience, strengthening arguments for continued support. Others saw it as a warning about escalation and the risks inherent in increasingly sophisticated warfare. Regardless of interpretation, the attack ensured that the maritime dimension of the conflict remained firmly in focus, shaping discussions and decisions far from the site of the explosion. As time passed, the immediate drama of the strike gave way to longer-term adjustments. Russian naval operations became more cautious, routes and patrol patterns shifted, and defensive measures were reinforced. These changes, while intended to reduce risk, also constrained flexibility and effectiveness. Every additional layer of protection came at a cost, whether in speed, reach, or operational freedom. In this way, the aftermath of the strike continued to influence behavior long after the initial damage was assessed and addressed. The incident ultimately highlighted how modern warfare rewards those who can impose uncertainty on their adversaries. By demonstrating that even well-defended assets were not immune, the drone strike injected doubt into Russian planning and confidence. That doubt, once introduced, is difficult to eliminate. It forces continuous adaptation, drains resources, and creates openings for further pressure. The aftermath was not a single moment but an ongoing process, reshaping perceptions, strategies, and expectations with each passing day, and ensuring that the impact of the strike extended far beyond the ship itself.